Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody here. It is wonderful to be here with all of you. And this afternoon, I want to take you on a quest, a spiritual quest. This quest, and after all, what is life if it is not a quest, is recorded in this book, which is the story of Shaykh Fadhlalla's journey among the Sufis. But it is much, much more than that. It is a man's attempt, and the questions that he've asked are the questions that I've asked, the questions that all of you have asked. Why are we here? How do we live? Where are we going? What makes it very unusual, and I think so important, as some of the reviewers picked up, in a time of divisiveness, where the conflicts between Muslims and Muslims, let alone many other groups and countries, are so great and have caused so much displacement, so much suffering in the world. This book is essentially a message of hope and of reconciliation. Shaykh Fadhlalla came from an Orthodox Shia background. His first master was a Hindu guru. He then became the pupil of a Sunni Shazali Shaykh, who was himself born Scottish. In the center that he set up in South Africa, one of the most important things, and very much signposted, was that nobody must speak ill of anybody else's madhab, that people must come together in peace, in harmony. All of our goals are the same. The path that we may take towards that ultimate goal, to connect and align ourselves with the light within, essentially that may be different. But the one thing we must know is that the path itself is not the goal. It is an aid. And unless we are able to live with respect for other people's way of getting to the ultimate goal, then we ourselves will be doing ourselves not only an injury to ourselves, but also to others. This book came about because Shaykh Fadhlalla wanted to put in writing, to communicate some of the questions that he had asked as to why, if Islam is the final revelation, if it is the perfect path, if the message is true and is the best, why then are the lands of Islam in such turmoil? Why are the Muslims often so miserable? What went wrong? So this book is not only a story of the wonderful Sufis that he met on his journey all over the world. It is not about just the history of Sufism. It is not only about various teachings that he gives to all of you. It is also to give an idea through looking at the Sufis, who are a very clearly definable, in some ways, body. Their histories may be different according to times and places. But it is just an incredible, incredible story of one man's determination and sincerity. Having been privileged to be following him on this path of the last 40 years, I can really witness that he left no stone unturned to journey along the road of Haqq. He traveled, he built, he published, he wrote, he opened his arms to whoever came to him. And he could be as effective transmitting to the gardener as he could to the PhD students. His conclusion about the Sufis were that they had really saved, protected the original message of Islam. He feels very, very strongly that the effulgence of that light, of the Mohammedan light, had barely been given to man when the success of the early wars of conquest and the wealth that came into the early Muslims veiled them in a way from the light. It became the empire building of the Umayyads. There was music and dance and slave girls and food. And for many of the quieter, more pious Muslims, they turned inward to try and capture the light that was the message, and where all around they saw people, as is the nature of man through the ages. We see this in different faiths, in different societies. But what had the message of the Prophet been about? What was it? What was the goal? And so initially you will have seen people like the legendary Hassan of Basra. You'll have seen people stepping more aside, more quiet, to do their prayers and meditation and try and align themselves with the original Mohammedan light. But then gradually it became not only the hermits, the ascetics, people staying a little bit by themselves, trying to avoid the people. It became groups of like-minded people who came together in different parts of the Muslim world. There is much similarity between the schools of Baghdad, of Junaid, the ones that people are more familiarized, and what happened in Central Asia and in places like Nishapur. These schools of Sufism developed a lot around masters, but also with different flavors. The flavors belong to the climate, they belong to the habits of food, of perfume, and of the background, the pre-Islamic and early days of Islamic background of the people. So there will always be different flavors. And as the years went by, as these tariqas or brotherhoods became more developed, often these flavors became sacrosanct. Now, there is nothing wrong with how you tie your turban or what dress you wear, what tea you drink, what perfume or incense is burnt in a room. But they have to be seen in perspective, as do the teachings, to the places and the times in which they developed. Now, once you have more than one person, you have a problem and you have a need for organization. And that is what happened with the Sufis. You had to have zawiyas, you had to have rules for the running of the zawiyas. So the institutionalization of Sufism, which meant often that some of the inner light and of the inner quest was lost, happened fairly early. And then you would have more break-off or splinter groups. A new master would, if you like, rehabilitate what he saw as going off the line. And then the state got involved. In much of Turkey, in Iran, Central Asia, it was the Sufis who brought, and of course the subcontinent, it was the Sufis who brought Islam to the hearts of the people who had been born to other faiths. And the various sultans became fully aware of the fact that they needed both to control their Sufi population in case they started politicking and encouraging people to fight unjust sultans, and also that they were an incredibly useful tool to keep the masses in check. By the time the great Ibn al-Arabi had gone to Cairo, where Salahuddin had realized that putting up zawiyas showed him to be a good man, a good sultan. He was friendly to the mystics, and it also meant that the state knew exactly what the mystics were doing. So Ibn al-Arabi had heard tell of this amazing zawiya where people were devoting their lives to inner contemplation. When he actually arrived, he said they seemed to be spending a lot of time combing their beards. And so that, is always the downside when things become a little bit more institutionalized. Shaykh Fadhlalla has recorded here some of the great contemporary Sufis, very different in their forms. I think he openly always pays tribute to Sufi Barakat Ali, who, if he could have had a favorite, was probably his. And he, in these stories of the various encounters with masters, most of whom, but not all, have passed on, there are teachings. If you read this book carefully, you will see among the poetry, among the quotes, because it is fairly liberally sprinkled with poems and sayings that we both liked, and also his own poetry, which is very contemporary and shows very much the song of Tawheed, which he sang to you this morning. And it is in that simplicity that his state now is. But at 40, he had many, many questions still to ask and people to see and to take advantage of the wisdom of somebody like Sufi Barakat Ali, who was to say that he was no longer man or woman because both had united in him, which is a great lesson, because if you are moving towards a point of unity, how can there be two of you, very different aspects, fighting? And the idea is to merge the masculine and feminine element until there is as near as one as there can be when we still have breath in our bodies and function in a realm of duality. Sufi Barakat Ali started as a Chisti, and then along the way he collected many, many tariqas and would subscribe to many, because ultimately I think he was probably teasing people and saying there is only one. I can't just belong to one group, one path. I belong to all of them. So what's the problem? Shaykh Fadhlalla made friends in Pakistan with one of the descendants of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Gilani. And he asked him, where shall I go? And at that time, a charity had been set up in Sri Lanka, and we had some friends here and a beautiful beachfront purchase to put up a zawiya, because he never wanted to be in the West, and the climate distressed him too much in England. And so he was always looking for that amazing location where seekers could come in, they could stay together. And he asked Sayyid Alauddin, where shall I go to? And told him about Sri Lanka, and the wise man sort of tut-tutted, and after that there was an awful lot of problems between the Buddhists and the Tamils, and it would not have been a good situation or a place to have a center for contemplation. And Alauddin said to him, go far, far away, further from any of the Muslim lands, and live among a people where the Muslims will never hold political power. Then, if you want to have your space for inner contemplation, you may be able to do it. And eventually, we went to South Africa, which has proved really a wonderful decision, because there is respect among the people of South Africa for the Muslims. A lot of them fought against apartheid with the ANC. And interestingly enough, it's a small thing, but whereas wearing a scarf, particularly if it's tied like this, brings about, in fact, with the Africans, a sense of solidarity, because that's how they tie their scarves. So even a simple thing like any attempt at hijab doesn't make you stick out in Africa. Instead, they will come, they will pat you and say, oh, you're dressing like us. Nobody really cares that much. And that is a wonderful, wonderful base. And friends and supporters of Shaykh Fadhlalla set up this center near Pretoria, and this too is mentioned in the book, and some of the very diverse type of visitors who have come to it. You have your own Sheikh Muslim who visited that and brought his own flavor. Sheikh Saadi, who is going to be with you tomorrow, also came with some of his ideas. And this is really a tribute to people from all over the world who gathered together, again bringing their own very different flavors. One of the most fascinating guests we had was the descendant of the Mahdi, who had himself, Imam Sadiq al-Mahdi, who has himself been Prime Minister of the Sudan. And he has such grace and charisma that one really understood why people were willing to follow his ancestor, of whom he looks quite like. And so it was almost having him there getting a whiff of history. And he gave his own feelings of the problems within Islam, had dated back even from the time of the Umayyads and Abbasids, when so many of the chroniclers were actually of Christian origin and often remained Christians, and he felt there had been, and that is his personal belief, there had been some tinkering, if you like, with the message, and was in the centuries to come to cause problems in the transmission. Now, we also have attempted to deal with a topic which is very key, I think, in this times where there has been so much difficulty, and that is of jihad, which is a very difficult to write in a fairly simplistic way, because the whole point in life is context. The behavior of a people has to be lived in context. With people going back, looking at a Medina model, that the teachings of Medina have an eternal reality, but the social structure and the way that people behave is, we are all the people of our own age, and we must be faithful to our own age. And the misreading of the original teachings and taking them completely out of context has meant immense harm and really murder. I mean, nothing in Islam suggests the killing of women, old people, and non-combatants. So we looked historically at some of the instances where there is no question jihad was waged and was fitting according to that time. I write a little bit about one of my favorite Muslim heroes, who some of you may know about, Emir Abdul Qadir of Algeria, who I think is the only person to have led a very successful jihad against the French in Algeria until they applied a scorched earth policy, and he realized that it was going to be the complete annihilation of the people unless he surrendered. He surrendered in good faith. He himself later was to say that he really had been brought up to be an alim, to study that, but at the request of his father, a Qadri Shaykh, at 24 he took the task of uniting Arab and Berber, which was quite difficult, and getting them to fight together against the French. He was so respected for his human rights that French members of the Senate said that if only the soldiers knew how well he behaved, none of our soldiers would fight against him. They compared him to what they considered to be the way, both in looks and behavior, of Jesus Christ. So he was a remarkable man by any stage. In exile in Damascus, during the Druze Wars, the people went out into the streets to find any foreigner, Christian or Jew, they could kill. He took his private army and evacuated all the foreign embassies. And when the mob said to him, Abdul Qadir, you killed many Christians, why are you stopping us doing it? He said, they invaded my country, they took my land. I was entitled to fight them. These people are doing nothing to you. You have no right. And in the end, France, having fought for so many years to prevent him holding on to his lands, gave him the Legion d'Honneur for saving their people. The Russians, the Americans, they all sent him medals. So you have the final irony. But the message is very simple. He realized that it was no longer possible to fight the foreigners, that time had moved on. He realized that the betrayal of his own people, he was able to deal to a certain extent with the French. The Sultan of Morocco betrayed him and poisoned his closest Khalifa when he went to ask for assistance against the French. His own people raided his possessions when a victory was lost, because the Arabs tended to think, okay, you lose a battle, Allah is certainly not on your side, we're going to find somebody else to back. So there you have it. So long as he felt it was correct to fight, he fought. When he felt that it was the time for the inner jihad, he turned to that and spent his last years teaching the works of Ibn al-Arabi in the great mosque in Damascus. Perfect in all through his life to the correctness of the situation he found himself in. And there were many others too. And many who, having fought jihad, at the end found that the materialism of the people they hoped they were leading to a better spiritual destiny, as was the case with Othman Danfodio. He managed to create a kingdom. He managed also, and his son Mohammed Bello and their sister, who is written about in the chapter on women, they were trying to create a society where rights were given to women, where women were educated. And yet what they found was, in their time, let alone what is happening now in Nigeria, that people just wanted material success. And so for the last years of his life, Othman Danfodio retreated to prayer and contemplation with a few people around him, because he was not prepared to rule a kingdom that in a way disappointed his aspirations. We also have a chapter on women, because after all, that's half of it all. And often there have been cultural abuses perpetrated on women. And so we felt that it was appropriate to celebrate some of the great female lights in Muslim history very briefly. And also Shaykh Fadhlalla recalls some of the women who he considered had light. Also his own mother, to whom he was devoted, and who was a woman of amazing light, and by her example gave so much to the people who came into contact with her. One of the women who most impressed him was a woman who ran an orphanage in Sri Lanka, Mrs. Junaid. And he'd visited a boys' orphanage. He asked to visit a girls' orphanage. And so the Sri Lankan friends took him there. And as he approached this slightly dilapidated building, there was the sound of the young voices making dhikr. And he came in, and the woman who was the matron said to him, it was the Eid, and we had no money for new clothes, for food or anything. So I told the girls just to do dhikr until somebody comes. And I think for 2 or 3 days, they were just doing relays of dhikr. And then eventually he and his friends came, and they got their food and they got their clothes. But he uses that as an example of faith. And as he grew older, experienced more of different types of people, as also the climate in the world had changed. He felt too that the role of the teacher also has to change in order to accommodate our time. The Shaykh in a village situation often controlled the people around him. He advised on businesses, he advised on marriage. None of his pupils could, say boo without consulting him. So he was a hugely authoritarian fellow to whom everybody had to give complete obedience. That worked in a village. There were always the closer ones who were completely devoted to a life of spiritual unfoldment. There were also the ones who were close. They came together, but they also had their businesses. They were perhaps not quite so dedicated, but they helped. They were a part of the community. And there are the outer ones who every now and then would come to the mosque, would listen to the teacher, and would consider themselves to be affiliated. Now we have a situation where people are absolutely kind of in a sense of dispersion. Families are not together, people cross continents. You have a situation with the internet where people can have Skype calls with a teacher, and information cannot be hidden in the same way as it was. People can go, they can research, they can find out what is happening. And they also have far greater access in one way to a like-minded seeker in Canada can be in touch with somebody in Spain. And this gives another dimension. But it also means that the teacher cannot exercise the same levels of authority on people. They cannot make the same promises. And one of the most endearing things about Shaykh Fadhlalla is how much he dislikes the power trip that many teachers, because don't think that all people who say they are teachers have the same station. And there is an awful lot of spiritual superstition that he attempts to unveil in Sufi links. People think that enlightenment is a bit like a thunder clap comes down, somebody is completely changed, and then they remain in this state of bliss, radiating light for the rest of their natural existence. The concept of fana without baka is not a very helpful one. Each of us, through our life, become, we hope, inshallah, more refined. It is a journey. There will be moments of epiphanies. There will be moments of moving up to not, when a state becomes a station. But ultimately, for all of us and for all of the acknowledged masters, it is a life of baka, of ongoingness, of increasing refinement, if we are able to stay on the right path. So he had wanted to share, don't see the teacher as being this character who has so much more than you do. We all have the same potential, man and woman, people from different races, different socioeconomic backgrounds. Where is the justice of Allah? If we believe in the justice, if we believe in the perfect destiny, how can we believe that we are brought into this world with less potential than another person? I could never be a concert pianist. That's true. There are certain traits, certain talents, maybe genetic, maybe environmental, and they belong. Some people are better at business than others. Our job as spiritual beings is to align ourselves with our destiny, to take it step by step, and to do the best we can without expectations, but acting as correctly as possible according to what we have been given by birth, by situation. And so he will always say, the teacher doesn't have more than you or more potential than you. The teacher has less than you. In the introduction, he talks about how he is writing about people who mindfully had made changes in their life. If we stay in places where we are comfortable, among people who we are comfortable with, we will not progress. And all of these people took 180-degree turns. Often they left their countries, they left the familiar. Many a sheikh from medieval times has been sent out to his master to the other end of the world and complained about the dreadful people he found himself in. He comes back to the master and he gets sent out again. Ali al-Hijri is one example, Sufi Sahib in South Africa, separated by centuries. They both came back and said, look, this is not good news. These people are ignorant, miserable, and I'm not enjoying myself, you know. Can't I come home? No. You go back, you do the best you can with them. And in both those cases, they left a legacy behind that was helpful and useful to the people of their time and the people who follow. So always remember, it is a question of the stripping off, the watchfulness of the nafs, of going against the nafs. So what they talk about, polishing the rough stone to make it a diamond. So Shaykh Fadhlalla always says, don't think that you can't get there. And also don't see the teacher as being this all-dictating, all-powerful being in a very structured, hierarchical sense. Courtesy should always be paid to somebody who knows more than you, in that sense that he has reached a point where he is less veiled. That's one thing. But you will notice that although a real teacher can sometimes sweep the floor with his pupils, very, very complimentary if a teacher stops and is thoroughly unpleasant to you. I mean, that probably is the greatest compliment that can be paid, because a true man of light will not even waste. He might say Assalamu alaikum, but he won't pay any attention at all. If a master, and I have seen this with not only with Shaykh Fadhlalla, but with others over the years, if they correct somebody, it is actually the greatest compliment, because it means potentially you are worth the trouble. You are worth that breath to try and bring you closer to a more perfect destiny. I don't know if any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask me? There is a couple of things that I would like, if there are no questions, just to read to you from the book. This is a very good, I wouldn't say it as a lesson, but it is an observation from the Diwan of Sheikh Fatori. No matter how much the teacher strives no matter how much the close follower wants, no matter how sincere he is, spending days and nights in worship, ultimately, enlightenment is a gift from Allah, which I think is a really beautiful teaching. Our destiny is mapped out for us. We walk into the film script of our life. Our teachers try, we work together. But ultimately, be it station or anything else that happens to us, ultimately, it is in the hands of Allah. And we have to remember that. Shaykh Fadhlalla had wanted me and others around us to emphasize very much that we are entering into a time of post-tariqah for those people who are on a Sufi path. That does not mean that we should not get together with like-minded people. It does not mean that the signposts of Sufism do not continue. What it means is to avoid the cultishness that has often disintegrated into one group of Sufis or one person of one madhab to a person of another madhab, saying, you know, my teacher's the best teacher, my teacher is the kutub of the age, you know, you guys are just absolutely off the path, etc. Anything that encourages excessive pride in your group and people. Look, we all of us find ourselves in situations with people who are more conducive to us. The different outer personalities of masters will attract different people. You have sheikhs who are alims, great alims, and most of the Sufis were firmly grounded in Sharia. And that is something that we have to remember, that historically it was a postgraduate course in a sense. And if you were not firmly grounded in Sharia, you would have been considered perhaps a little bit more of a Kalandari, Mejlubi type. And some of them put Islam, they cast disrepute of it. And many of the reformist movements came into being quite rightly because there was a lot of confusion. I mean, including the Neo-Sufi movement of Ahmed ibn Idris. And throughout the ages, people had to change. Now, today, we have less chance often to be in the continuous presence of a master. Few people can give up their livelihood wherever they are to just trail around. So it is a time of greater personal responsibility, and that is his message. Not that you should not hope to find somebody who can mirror you, not that you should not be with like-minded people, but ultimately putting a lot of emphasis on belonging to an order and to the rules of the order are not necessarily how it's going to be. We know that a small amount of time with an acknowledged master will do more than all the Skype calls and all the study. I was very, very touched by someone who had visited in South Africa, and he came up to me in Denmark after I talked about Sufi links, and he said, "Oh, I am so relieved because you mentioned that Shaykh Fadhlalla said he had never really understood Ibn al-Arabi until he had himself experienced the stations that he describes. And there is a warning in this book against delving too much into medieval literature, where if you don't have the Arabic for a start, or you don't have access, linguistically you may be confused by translations, and also that you may preempt states by reading of somebody else's experience. And this man, who was actually doing a PhD in a branch of Islamic studies, he said, I was having such problems with Ibn al-Arabi, and tomorrow I'm going to see a potential supervisor to see if he's going to be any use. And I'm trying to go back to the original Arabic because the translations aren't doing it, but you know, I'm not that good. And he said, oh, such a relief, just to think that other people, I mean, Shaykh al-Ishraq, Surawadi, and his deliberations on light are incredibly difficult. Nobody should feel a failure if they don't understand these things. Everybody must deal with what is put in front of them. Because everybody, even on with the same goal, their journey will unfold in other ways. Now, I will end now, if I can find, with a poem of Shaykh Fadhlalla's. Yeah. Don't miss it. Don't miss an opening. To what? Life. Don't miss it. Don't talk or reflect. Don't think or meditate. Just don't miss it. Your life. Quest of tomorrow, knowledge and love. Fulfilled moment. Don't miss it. Fear disguised as hope. Don't miss it. Life, now, forever. And that really is his message to everybody. Assalamu alaikum.